True crime allows us to experience fear in a real way. I wasn't sipping my tea for dramatic effect. I just really had a dry throat.
Science. Technology. Medicine. Health. These four things make the world go round. Without them, we couldn't exist. This is the Monday Science Podcast, a weekly show bringing you the latest research and news in science, technology, medicine, and health, answering your questions or finding experts in the field to answer them. Your host is a pharmacist, an award-winning scientist. She leads her own research group and is the founder of King's College London Fight the Fakes. A tad bit on the qualified side. Welcome to Monday Science. Here's your host, Dr. Bahijja Abraham.
Welcome back, everyone. Happy Monday. Happy start of the week. Happy October. In fact, I should probably be saying happy September, October. It's been a while, and I, as ever, apologize. So, how have you all been? What have you been up to? Having this one-sided, well, it's not one-sided. I'm sure you guys replied and said, yeah, I've been all right. Once again, I mean, 2022 has been a very interesting year for me so far. I cannot believe that it's already October. November is round the corner. December is round the corner. End of year is round the corner. And 2023 is round the corner. It's actually quite terrifying. But anyway, this year for me it's been really challenging. Good. And I think that's been reflected in my inconsistencies with the podcast, particularly, actually. And that's thankfully turning around. It's been, I don't know how everybody's like finding the transition from a completely virtual world that we had, a remote working world in 2020, a sort of hybrid world coming towards the end of 2021. And then I found 2022 has essentially been back to, well, an attempt of back to life prior to the pandemic. So really more face-to-face. And I found that adjustment and that transitioning process quite challenging and just trying to manage my time. And I think in terms of, there's a lot of information about this and, you know, people commenting on this, social media and so forth, that workload for everyone has just increased. And so today I'm going to be talking about what I've been using to cope, which is, I don't know how, if everybody else has been dealing with this, but I've found I've been watching a lot of true crime. My coping mechanism has been I've been watching lots of true crime documentaries, anything true crime really. And then a recent addition was watching reruns of Grey's Anatomy. That seems to calm me down. Anyway, I'm going to talk more about the true crime because I'm still trying to digest the Grey's Anatomy edition. But just to give you a bit of an update, so since I last connected with everyone through Monday Science, increased workload, but I feel like everybody's going through that. And, you know, there's been increased workload generally felt across academia. There's been a lot of people leaving academia. There's an interesting hashtag leave academia, very interesting on Twitter. Some big names have left their academic position, professors in various different fields in STEM and non-STEM. And that's been interesting. That's all I have to say about that right now. But that has been very interesting to see how there's been a sort of a mass exodus of people, academics such as myself, leaving the profession and leaving the sector and going into industry or a more basically just a non-academic space. And then also we've had that another mass exodus of healthcare professionals leaving, and especially those who worked in the NHS, leaving their kind of their very clinical roles and going into more just a different space. So it's an interesting time all round. What have I been up to? So transitioning from virtual to face-to-face, then attending quite a few conferences. So I've talked a little bit, I've started this off a bit of a downer, haven't I? But I've attended quite a few conferences this year. I think I talked to you guys about the controlled release Society conference in Montreal, Canada, where I tried lots of food. I was invited to speak on scientific outreach, which was great. And then more recently, so since my last episode, I was part of the organizing committee for the Academy of Pharmaceutical Sciences conference, PharmSci. And that was in Belfast, my first time going to Belfast. I really lovely place, lovely people. And that's also where I was awarded the Emerging Scientist of 2022 award, and I gave a talk which was really nice. It felt very nice to talk about my journey and to present myself to the pharmaceutical science. I was going to say world. I don't know if that's the right word, but the pharmaceutical sciences, the key stakeholders and key people in field, and present myself as an emerging scientist, but also showcase what I've been up to in my career so far. And that was nice. And then I also got to chair a session on antimicrobial research along with Professor Brendan Gilmore from Queen's Belfast University. And that was nice as well. That was early September. And then a few weeks later I was a speaker, invited speaker, and I chaired another session at the Making Pharma, also known as the Making Pharmaceuticals conference in Dublin. I arrived back on a Wednesday, and then Thursday I had my first lecture, delivering my first lecture, first face-to-face lecture since 2020. I talk a lot about pharmaceutics, that's the science of making medicines, and I talk to them a lot about solid dosage forms. Sorry, I'm picking up my tea. For those who are watching on YouTube, I've got a cup of tea, and yes, my nails are super red, but here we are. I started my lecture series on the journey, like powders through to making a solid dosage form, through to quality control, making medicines, and all the considerations with that, including things like quality control, medicines quality, issues around fake medicines, and trying to lecture face to face now is it's so different from before. Having said that, there's a tool called Poll Everywhere before the pandemic. During when I would give talks, I felt Poll Everywhere was quite a good way to engage and connect with people virtually. And so I added that back into my teaching, but in a different way this semester. And it seems to have worked quite well. You can create polls and students can engage, anybody can engage, so they can answer questions, they connect through their phone. You can either connect through the website or phone or on the laptop. And what I started doing was, after teaching each section, I asked the students to highlight what they've understood and then what they haven't understood. And I decided to do that because I understand that it can be quite nerve-wracking to put your hand up. Not everybody is going to be confident enough in the classroom to say, oh, hi, I don't understand this, I don't understand that. So I found that Poll Everywhere was a good, FYI, they are not sponsoring this episode, so I'm not trying to sell. I'm just wanting to share a positive experience that I've had with a tool that has helped to increase my engagement in teaching. And then, yeah, so I'm sorry, I've totally lost my train of thought talking about Poll Everywhere and teaching. But as I mentioned earlier, my coping mechanisms in this time of stress and this time of increased workload and time of, just stuff, has been to watch. I feel, is this a safe space to confess that I've been watching a lot of true crime? Well, it turns out a lot of people have been watching a lot of true crime. And true crime is a genre that can be maybe a book, film, documentary, whatever, that examines or tells a story of a real crime. There is also crime fiction, which is a genre of fiction, but that deals with crimes, like their detection, criminals, and motives. So it's a bit different. But true crime is essentially a film or book that examines the story of a real crime. So before the start of the pandemic, I always watch true crime. There's so many different channels. There's shows, Snapped, and I found it interesting. But I found that during the lockdowns, I started watching more true crime, and I came across this YouTube channel called That Chapter. I don't know if anybody else watches that show, but it's great. Like, really, and what I like about it is 20 minutes, 15 minutes, maximum 30 minutes, true crime, and the host, whose name I've forgotten, goes through like what happened, and it's really good and just things. So I found that I was just watching that, I would be engaged and listening. I didn't really think about it for a while because I still watch, but not as much. I don't really watch all the true crime as much. I didn't, sorry. And then in this year, I started back in moments of stress, in moments of, oh, there's so much going on. I'm just going to put some true crime on the in the background. So I've thought, seen as I said, the last few months has been quite hectic, and so my true crime intake has increased. So I wanted to talk about it, and I actually thought, let me take some time to investigate and understand what is going on. So the first thing, the interesting revelation, I guess I could say, I'm just having a sip of tea. I guess, sorry, for those who can see me, I'm having a lovely cup of builder's tea if you want to know how I drink my tea. So the interesting thing is that there's been a growing obsession globally in what they call murder media. So murder media being true crime documentaries, true crime podcasts, and other things. Here are the highlights of what I found out. One, true crime allows us to experience fear in a real way. I wasn't sipping my tea for dramatic effect. I just really had a dry throat. Secondly, point number two, we as a society want to understand the true nature of evil. Thirdly, stories of crime or criminals being brought to justice helps us to affirm a sense of order. And lastly, binge watching true crime can make us more anxious. Two words that get passed around a lot when you talk about true crime is psychopath and sociopath. Now, disclaimer, I am not an expert in this area. I am like you listening, or if you are an expert in this area, please get in touch so we can have you come on the podcast, because I need some clarification here. Because I have to say, trying to get the definition of psychopath and sociopath, it was very, very interesting. Oh, now I do love a definition. So I want to tap into definitions of psychopaths and sociopaths. And then I'm going to focus on talking about how true crime allows us to experience fear in a safe way. And then the repercussions, the issues of binge watching true crime can making us feel more anxious. Okay, let's get into some definitions. Let's start off with a psychopath. So a definition that I found was that a psychopath can be used to describe someone who is callous, unemotional, and morally depraved. Then you've got the sociopath definition, which refers to as someone living with an antisocial personality disorder, and people with conditions might seem charming, charismatic at first. They find it difficult to understand people's feelings. So both sociopathy and psychopathy are well recognized amongst mental health professionals, but they also carry a lot of stigma, particularly for people living with personality disorders. And so it really is important to not just give like blanket statements and say, oh, so that person's a sociopath, that person's a psychopath. That's not nice. There's a psychologist called Robert Hare, and he created the psychopathy checklist called PCL-R, and has defined sociopathy as involving a conscious or a sense of the person having a sense of right or wrong or morality. But that sense of morality doesn't line up with cultural and social norms. According to Robert Hare, as I said, who's the psychologist who created the psychopathy checklist, he said that psychopathy involves no sense of morality or empathy. There's a paper I found. It was research from 2013, published in 2013 in a journal called Aggression and Violent Behavior. And this suggests that the difference between the two may be related to differences in the brain, including differences in gray matter volume and the brain development. Trying to understand this increased obsession with true crime during lockdowns and just still increasing with the pandemic, especially during the height of the pandemic. Apparently, we people in society enjoyed experiencing fear in a safe environment. Experiencing fear in a safe and controlled environment whilst there's chaos going on around us, i.e. the pandemic and all that it came with, made us feel safe. Watching true crime makes people question themselves. It makes us question our traits, our behaviors as a people, society, humans. And watching in a way, watching the true crime content or murder media is it's a weird form of learning. And this is according to a forensic psychologist, Aditya Sundare. And they say that such videos help people identify risks and show the signs that help recognize these kinds of issues in society. Adding to that is perhaps it can also help viewers identify the sort of people that would commit such crimes or even spot liars or certain traits in their own lives. And another psychologist, Dr. Pamela Rutledge, said that during the height of the pandemic, it was comforting to be able to experience fear in a safe environment. And that also crime tends to attract our attention because we are hardwired to notice things that give an indication of danger. And so we tend to watch these true crime things to see if we are at risk. Therefore, being able to find an answer or solution would make, those watching it feel safer and overall more satisfied. But then excessive watching of true crime can make us more anxious. So there's a neuropsychologist, Jasdeep Mango-Jathani, and they said that overexposure to horrific crimes and obsessions with the why, the how, can lead to paranoia, anxiety, getting like startled responses, and then having an overactive nervous system. And so it can put you in this fight or flight mode, causing our mental health and physical health to go into a state of stress, even though it's not a real situation for us, like the true crime things that we're watching. Those are like the key things. I actually, to be honest, let me confess, when I started reading more into this, I was like, oh gosh, I've gone down a rabbit hole here. I need to pull back. I need to pull back. I think that the thing is with true crime, it's interesting to see how other people have been in the same boat where there's been this increase in engagement watching. I'm watching less true crime now. It's still there, but I'm watching less, and I'm actually watching more Grey's Anatomy. I don't know. I may need to figure out why Grey's Anatomy.
You've been listening to the Monday Science Podcast, a weekly show bringing you the latest research and news in science, technology, medicine, and health. We hope you've gotten some useful and thought-provoking info from the show, and we hope you had fun along the way. We know we did. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on our website at www.mondaysciencepodcast.com. Shoot us an email at info@mondaysciencepodcast.com. Find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube at Monday Science, and access episode summaries at mondayscience.medium.com. See you next week on the Monday Science Podcast.